Art is an ever-present force in our lives. Everywhere we look, we see art. We experience art, whether we're listening to it or whether we're viewing it. Experience it with every sense. We see it, we hear it, we smell it, we feel it. Art is in food. Art is in architecture. Art is in the cars that we drive. We can't escape it. It's always a part of who we are. The body of arts consists of representations, ideas, beliefs, and values of the past, the present, and or even of the future. So the etymology of the word art is that it comes from the word ars, which was a Latin word that means everything that is made or composed by man, everything that is man-made. So that means that anything that you or I could create is considered art. The 7 areas of the arts that we will explore in this course structure will be the following: painting, sculpture, architecture, music and dance, literature, and theater and cinema. You want to make sure that you remember these, devote these to memory because you will see them quite a few times in exams and assignments in the future. In this class, we discuss very frequently the 4 main purposes for studying humanities. Here they are. Number 1 is to understand and evaluate human endeavors, attitudes, interactions, and more. Number 2, to understand and appreciate human creativity. Number 3, to contemplate one's own humanity. And number 4, to critically analyze perspectives about humankind and human endeavors. In the next 4 slides, we'll talk a little bit more in depthly about what these mean. Our first purpose for studying humanities is to understand and evaluate human endeavors. What this means is to be able to look at the values that certain cultures place on the arts, certain traditions that different cultures have. For instance, the Middle Eastern cultures may have traditions of prayer throughout the course of the day. Christian cultures may choose to, or I should say, not, well, yes, it's inside of Christianity, but think about Catholicism, of praying to Hail Mary, of chanting. So even though that may not be a static art there, we study humanities because we want to understand why do people do the things that they do inside of different cultures and what it means to them. It may not necessarily affect how you move about the world, but it's good for us to understand why people do these things so that we can have more of a respect for one another and respect for traditions outside of our own. Okay, so I want you to look at this image. It has across the top, it says Istanbul Mosque Decorative Calligraphy. So looking at it, we see lots of things. I want you to start to think about what images do you see within this one large image. What do you think it might be? What are we looking at? And then how was it put together? Those 2 questions that we explored in lecture 1. Well, first, if you're familiar with the term mosque, a mosque is a place of prayer. It is a religious place for Muslim cultures. And what we're looking at is actually the ceiling of a mosque. And what we see are lots of calligraphy or writing that is the kind of squiggly writing that you see. So I can't read what I see, but there may be some people who can look at this and be able to interpret what it is. Perhaps these are words, but they mean something to, I'm sure they mean something very deeply to people of this faith. Also, look at how intricate all the different colors are woven together. We see blues, we see browns, we see creams, and they're very ornate. Notice the circular motion of the things that we see. And then we see one big circle in the center with other circles going around it. These are things I want you to notice as you're looking around your world and start to question, what is it that I see? How is it all put together? And also, what does this mean to me? When I look at this, what is it a reflection of in my life? For me, noticing that it does look kind of like calligraphy, it makes me think about my friend who is she is does calligraphy as a hobby. It also makes me think about my other friends who are Muslim, who pray multiple times throughout the day, who kneel facing the sun and pray. And so everything that we look at around us in our world has some type of connection to us, whether we realize it or not. So what might this piece mean to you? I want you to think about that as we move forward. So, our second purpose for studying humanities is to understand and appreciate human creativity. For example, to recognize and enjoy beauty or conflict in a particular piece of art. So, although we may not like everything we see, everything may not be aesthetically pleasing to us that is created in artistry, we do want to be able to recognize it at art and to also find some things that we can enjoy about it, or at least appreciate it as art. So creativity is to be found and appreciated not only in arts and humanities, but we also appreciate the creativity that is found in art, science, and different craft activities. So let's look at this next example that explores, so we can really explore a little bit deeply, a little bit more deeply rather, an appreciation of human creativity and an understanding of it. Okay, so if we were in the classroom setting in person, I would have this projected on our screen and I would ask you to tell me what it is that you see. Tell me some things that you see in this particular image. So I'll pause and give you a few moments to just think about, take in everything that you see and think about, what am I looking at? So there's a story that's going on. If we look at it first, our eyes probably start somewhere toward the top of the image. But if we kind of look down to the lower right bottom of the image, we see a man who is down on the floor. He has his hands up like he's begging or praying. And he is looking down toward these little circular items that are on the floor. What could they potentially be? Could they be bottle caps? Could they be coins? What are they? I won't tell you just yet because we'll discuss that in the next slide. But then we also see there are some gentlemen who are located just above him. They're actually seated and standing. So they're at a higher plane than he is. And I see one gentleman whose hand is pushing away and he's turning his face away, as if to say he wants nothing to do with what this gentleman that's kneeling is there for. And then the other gentlemen are looking forward, and I see one who's standing with his eyes very wide as he's looking out at what's going on. This piece does not look like something that would take place today in 2020. This looks like something from a long time ago, probably BC times. So we're looking at some action of something that's going on. There's also this very large book that is in the light. I wonder if that has anything to do with what we're seeing. We'll go to the next slide where we'll find out a little bit more about what it is that we've just seen. So what we were just looking at was a painting that is titled Judas Returning the 30 pieces of silver. And what it shows us is that this is a piece based on one of the four gospels, from the Passion narrative, or the Passion of Christ narrative. So in the Holy Bible, the Christian Bible, at the Last Supper, Jesus announces that one of his disciples would betray him into enemy hands. The culprit is one of his disciples named Judas, who has already been paid by the chief priests and elders of the Jerusalem temple to lead soldiers to Jesus and identify him with a kiss. So once the deed is done, however, Judas feels very bad about it. He rushes to the temple and he throws his payment money down in front of them who hired him. as if that might absolve his guilt, though he is beyond believing it will. So in the painting, what we see is him kneeling and wailing with grief. His clothes are torn up. His scalp is bloody because he's pulled out his hair. The elders back off in shock, and the chief priests hold up one hand as if to block out the sight of the man, push him away, and disappear him. So what happens after that is Judas leaves the temple and he hangs himself. That is the story of what we see depicted here, and that is the story that is found in one of the four Gospels in the New Testament of the Christian Bible. So this piece of art is not just something just for aesthetic reasons. It wasn't created just to be something beautiful. It was created to depict something that means something to people who may be Christians, who read the Bible, who are devout in nature. So it has symbolism, it has representation. All right, so we'll move on to the next purpose. So our third purpose for studying humanities is to be able to contemplate one's own humanity, or for example, to be able to see yourself in the work that is before you. So not always will everything be something that you see yourself in right away, but we want you to be able to look very deeply and in-depthly in what it is that the work of art is before you, and to be able to find who you are in what's being represented. Let's move forward. In this piece of art, which is looks to be a painting, we see a young man. And I would typically, if we were face to face, or rather in person, I would ask my students, or ask you, how do we know that this is a young man? Well, one of the things we kind of notice is that his face appears small, his head appears small. And we also notice that this is a black young man. How do we know that? We recognize that by the color of his skin, but also by his nose, the shape of his nose, the width of his nose, and also how full his lips are. Additionally, some students might say something like, I noticed that his ears appear large as well. And then we see these colors that are swirling. All these swirling colors that the artist Cedric Huckabee decided to use to portray this young man. I would ask my students to tell me, what do you think this young man is thinking about? Why do you think that the artist Cedric Huckabee decided to swirl the colors around the way that he did, specifically the colors that are swirled on his forehead? What do you think that represents? I want you to take a moment to think about that. Our fourth and final purpose for studying humanities is to critically analyze perspectives about humankind and human endeavors. For example, to analyze a piece of art, or to analyze a philosophical argument. Because please note that art also includes literature, whether it be poetry, whether it be prose, or whether it be fiction. So we'll look forward and we'll analyze some endeavors that we see, or rather some images that we see in the following slides. So this is a photograph that was taken by Early Hudnall Jr., who is the most recent retired photographer for Texas Southern University, but he is also the photographer laureate for the entire state of Texas. He is a very well-respected photographer, not only here in the city of Houston, not only in the state of Texas, but as you can see, the fact that this print lives in the Smithsonian American Art Museum in Washington, D.C., he is a highly well-respected photographer across the country. So this one is titled The Guardian. And I want you to just take a moment to look at what it is that we see in this photograph. Take it in. Notice that it's in black and white. We see a man who is a black man at that, who is holding what looks to be a child in his arms. He has his hands firmly clasped in front of this child, and this child is seemingly inside of his coat. He's looking out toward the right, looking up like he's looking at something. We notice an American flag that's behind him. Can't tell how far back behind him it is, but it's not too far because we can notice what it is. I also see a woman who is standing further back behind him. So it seems to be that they are out in a crowd. This child that is in front of him, perhaps maybe a young girl. It's a little hard to tell what the gender may be of this child, but this child has on a coat as well, has on a scarf, and the man has on a very heavy coat, looks velvet, um, and looks to be maybe a wool collar, and he has on large sunglasses. I want you to look at this photograph and see what it is that you may be able to analyze as well about this piece. What do you think is going on in this work of art? We'll move forward. So here's an explanation of what we see. The photographer took the picture at the girl's eye level, so now we know the gender is a young girl, and we are immediately drawn to her smiling face, which is framed by her white coat, her hood, and her scarf. Apparently, her winter outfit is now warm enough because she's snuggled up against the man who towers above her and the viewer. Although the man looks off into the distance, his large sunglasses are mirroring a cityscape. He nonetheless assumes his role as guardian, which is why Hudnall chose to title this piece The Guardian. He has tucked the girl inside his big plush coat and linked his hands together in front, embracing her securely. Together the two form a large triangle that fills the foreground. The straightforward, symmetrical composition suggests that the relationship is stable and solid. So this young girl does not seem to be sick or in danger. Behind the man's head is a small American flag, the kind waved by the hundreds during parades on the 4th of July and Thanksgiving. Whether shooting at a parade or some other event, the setting is not specific. Hudnall uses the flag to emphasize wholesome values. Lastly, there are 4 factors for identifying art perceptually. The first being artistic form. So all artistic objects and artistic events have form, as we talked about in last week's lecture. Form is the interrelationships of part to part and then part to whole. So there always needs to be perceptible unity. What we perceive, what that means is that everything that is involved or a part of whatever the piece of art is that is before us that we're analyzing, is every piece is connected in some type of way. There are some unifying factors for every part of what we see. Artistic form distinguishes art from objects or events that are not works of art. Okay, so our second factor is content. The content is the main statement of the work of art and its artistic form. Okay, so what are we looking at? What is it made of? That's our question of how is it put together. The content is, is it a pencil? Is it a graphite work of art? Is it a painting? Is it watercolor? Is it what are we looking at? Or what are we dealing with? Because we're not always just dealing with visual art. We're also talking about content, literary content. We're also talking about musical content. What is the main statement of the work of art? And then the third thing is the subject matter. What is the topic? Okay, so that's easier to understand when we're talking about music, perhaps, or lyrics, where we have words. We can kind of find the subject matter a little bit easier, but sometimes subject matter it requires a little bit more thought when we're talking about dance or when we're talking about visual art, or even when we're talking about architecture. But it's once again easier to find. We're looking at performing arts such as music or dance or theater and cinema. And then the fourth one is participation. So we must not only give, but also sustain our undivided attention. Only by participation can we come close to a full awareness of what the work of art, not just paintings, but any work of art, is all about. So you got to be present, both mentally and physically, to understand how to identify art perceptually. Okay, so you might be wondering by this point, why do I need this class? Why are we studying the arts? It's because through arts, and through humanities, we can be connected to places that we have not visited, and we can understand the past or history with which has significance to the present and which has even further significance to our future. It makes us encounter great minds and hearts of human history. If we don't understand the things that have happened in our past, it's hard to understand sometimes why we are who we are today. And also remember that at some point in time, we will be the past, and there will be people who will come after us who will be studying the things that we find common as our in our everyday presence today. So it's important to have an understanding of the past, or to be able to analyze it in order to understand where you are today. Another reason why we study arts is because through arts and humanities, we'll be studying what humans have found valuable or good throughout the course of time. So if we think about it, anything that is created that is artistic is something that we place some sense of value in. And we find something good about it, even when it is to portray something that is not so good to people. Think about films. If you think about films that are made about gang culture, while some people may not believe that that is a culture that is positive, has brought much positivity to communities, the filmmakers felt like it is a good thing to portray it so that people have maybe a better understanding of why people participate in gang culture, why people choose to be a part of it, or even if there is a choice, there was a good reason behind highlighting it, because there is importance in understanding more about the culture. Whether you respect it or not, there is something that someone who has no idea of what is involved in gang culture can understand about a film that is made about gang culture. So that is why we study the arts, is to understand what people find value in and what they find to be good throughout the course of time. Also, through arts and humanities, we experience connection between culture and community through different art exposures. When we go and visit museums, when we go to concerts, we experience theater performances, and when we support local artists. Please make sure it's important that we support our local artists, whether those are students who are at Texas Southern University or students in other places. We always want to support those that are around us because they reflect our communities, they reflect our life experiences. But also, of course, we want to support those that are on larger platforms as well. It's important to get a very rich understanding of art all around us, from very close to very far, so that we can recognize when there are connections, and also we can gain a respect for other cultures within our communities. Lastly, we study arts because through arts and humanities, we increase our respect for cultural and individual differences through a knowledge of achievements and of world civilization. The humanities, we gain a global perspective through the knowledge of world cultures. So we may not be able to travel in a lifetime to countries far and wide, but through the study of the arts, it gives us an understanding, a richer understanding of the experiences of the people who are in the very farthest corners of the world from where we are. And so it's important to study it, to understand it, to recognize it, and respect it, so that we can know that we're actually more alike than we are different.